Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee and this week I want to talk about solo wargaming and why it isn't what you think. Let's talk about something that for a long time had a bit of a reputation problem in the hobby, solo wargaming. Because if you just say the words playing solo, it conjures up a very particular image, doesn't it? A lonely table, a single player moving both sides, perhaps narrating dramatically to themselves while the rest of the world carries on without them. It sounds frankly a bit bleak, but here's the thing, that image couldn't be further from the reality for a huge number of wargamers today. In fact, whenever I brought up solo gaming on the channel, I'm immediately hit with a wave of comments saying things like, this is the only way I get to gaming now, or most of my hobby time is solo these days. So clearly something is going on here. Solo wargaming isn't just a fallback, it's become a core way that many people engage with the hobby. And today I want to bring that conversation up to date by looking at how we can make solo play genuinely engaging, challenging and, dare I say it, surprisingly social in its own way, by exploring the different ways we can automate an opponent, whether through clever rules design, classic systems or even modern technology. Now, before we get into the mechanics of automated enemies and artificial intelligence plotting your downfall, it's worth addressing the obvious question, why are so many people playing solo in the first place? Because it's very easy to assume that this is all about isolation, but in reality it's usually about practicality. If you read through comments from fellow wargamers, you'll see the same themes coming up again and again. People moving to more rural areas where the nearest club is a proper expedition, work schedules that don't line up with club nights, family commitments that make a 4-hour Saturday game feel like planning a military campaign in itself, and sometimes it's just simple reality that your regular opponent has vanished into the warp of life getting in the way. None of this is negative, it's just life doing what life does best, which is interfering with our carefully planned tabletop battles. There's also another side to this, which is preference. Some players genuinely enjoy solo gaming as their primary way of engaging with the hobby. Not because they can't play others, but because solo play offers something different. It's more relaxed, more flexible, and in some cases more immersive. You can set up a game, play a turn, go and make a cup of tea, come back, rethink your strategy, carry on without anyone tapping their watch or reminding you that you've spent 10 minutes deciding whether your cavalry should charge. It's gaming on your terms, at your pace, and for a lot of people that's incredibly appealing. And frankly, once you get past the initial idea that solo equals second best, the benefits start stacking up quite quickly. First and foremost, a game is always better than not gaming at all. What might sound obvious, but it's worth stating. If the alternative is your beautifully painted miniatures sitting in a shelf, then solo play is the thing that brings them to life. It keeps you engaged with the hobby. It keeps the ideas flowing and it gives you that sense of progression that comes from actually playing games rather than just thinking about them. It's also one of the best ways to improve as a player. When you're playing solo, you're not worrying about making mistakes in front of an opponent. You can experiment, you can try bold, ridiculous plans and see how they play out without anyone judging you, except perhaps yourself, which is often harsher anyway. It's a safe environment to learn rules, test scenarios and really get to grips with how a system works. In fact, I'd argue that a few solo games are one of the best ways to prepare for playing with others, because you turn up with a level of confidence and familiarity that makes the whole experience smoother for everyone. There's also something to be said for the depth of understanding you gain. When you're playing both sides, even with some form of automation, you're forced to think about the game from multiple perspectives. You start to see the strengths and weaknesses of different units, the flow of the battle and the decision making process in a much more holistic way. It's like being both player and umpire at the same time, and that gives you a deeper experience and appreciation of the mechanics and the narrative of the game. Before we move on, I want to give a quick shout out to the amazing people who make these videos possible, our channel members. If you're enjoying the content, please consider joining the team. Memberships start at just £1 and every single penny is reinvested back into the channel to keep this conversation going. Just click the join button below to see the perks. Now back to today's topic. So, if solo gaming is not only viable but actually beneficial, the next question is, how do we make it interesting? Because the real challenge isn't playing both sides, it's avoiding that creeping sense that you already know what the enemy is going to do. That's where automation comes in, and this is where things get really interesting, I think. One of the most elegant solutions I've come across is the concept of the rules-based automation system, where the enemy's behaviour is dictated by a set of simple, logical rules. Now, a great example of this is the Mr Babbage system found in The Men Who Would Be Kings. Now, Mr Babbage isn't some steampunk villain plotting your demise, although that would be quite entertaining, but rather a structured way of determining enemy actions based on priorities and conditions. Instead of you deciding what the opposing force does, you consult a set of guidelines. If the enemy can shoot, it shoots. If it can charge, it charges. If neither is possible, it moves in a certain way, depending on the type of unit it is. It sounds simple, but the beauty lies in how those rules interact with the battlefield situation to create behaviour that feels surprisingly organic. What's clever about systems like this is that they remove your direct control over the enemy, while still keeping things fast and intuitive. You're not rolling on massive tables or consulting flowcharts that require a degree in advanced mathematics. Instead, you're following a clear set of priorities that produce believable outcomes. And because those outcomes are driven by the situation on the table rather than your intentions, you get that all-important element of uncertainty. Now, this idea isn't new, of course. Solo wargaming has a long and proud history, and one of the classic approaches comes from Charles Grant and his programmed wargame scenarios. These are essentially pre-designed scenarios where the enemy's actions are dictated by a series of instructions that unfold as the game progresses. You might only reveal certain information when your troops reach a particular point, or trigger specific enemy responses based on your actions. It's a bit like a choose-your-own-adventure book with muskets and cavalry charges. The brilliance of these systems is that they create narrative tension. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, and that sense of discovery keeps you engaged. There are also more modern systems that build on these ideas, incorporating randomisation, card-driven mechanics and event tables to keep things unpredictable. Drawing a card to determine enemy actions, rolling on a table to see how aggressive they behave, or introducing random events that disrupt your carefully laid plans. All of these add layers of uncertainty that make solo play feel less like a puzzle you've already solved and more like a dynamic, evolving battle. Now, this brings me neatly to something I've been working on with Paul from Pursuit. In Battle Chronicle, The Retreat from Moscow, we've built a Mr Babbage sort of style system directly into the game. The idea is to create an opponent that feels responsive and challenging without bogging the player down in complex procedures. It's about striking that balance between control and unpredictability, giving you enough structure to guide the enemy's actions, but enough variation to keep you guessing. And I have to say, seeing it in action has been incredibly encouraging. You get moments where the enemy does something that genuinely surprises you, and that's when you know you're onto something special. Now, of course, we can't talk about automation in 2026 without mentioning the big, slightly controversial elephant in the room, AI. Because over the past few years, the idea of using AI to drive solo wargaming has gone from a curious experiment to something that's genuinely viable. And I did touch on this briefly a few years ago, back when AI was just starting to edge into public awareness. Since then, things have moved on at quite a pace. The basic idea is fairly straightforward. Instead of relying solely on pre-written rules or random tables, you use an AI model to generate decisions for the opposing force. You describe the situation, the AI suggests a course of action, and you implement it on the table. In theory, that gives you an opponent that can adapt, respond, and even develop a kind of personality over the course of a game or a campaign. Now, of course, if you look at discussions among wargamers online, you'll find a wide range of opinions on this. Some people are incredibly enthusiastic. They have the idea of having a dynamic opponent that can think in ways that a static system can't. They talk about AI creating unexpected strategies, adding narrative flavour, and even acting as a kind of virtual opponent that you can play against in a more conversational way. For them, it's an exciting extension of the hobby. Others, of course, are more cautious. There are concerns about consistency. AI can sometimes produce decisions that don't quite make sense in the context of the rules. There's also the question of control. Some players prefer the predictability and transparency of traditional systems, where you can see exactly how and why a decision is made. And then there's the broader debate about AI in general, which is, to put it mildly, a bit polarised. For some, the use of AI in any creative or hobby context is a step too much, and that's a perspective that deserves to be acknowledged. But perhaps the most interesting approach is to combine these ideas. Instead of replacing traditional systems with AI, use them together. A framework like Mr Babbage provides a structure, the rules that keep everything grounded, while AI adds flavour and variation. You might use the system to determine that the enemy will attack, and then ask the AI how that attack is carried out, or what the commander's intent is. In that sense, AI becomes less of a decision maker and more of a narrative assistant, enhancing the experience rather than dictating it. Ultimately, like any tool, it comes down to how you use it. Solo wargaming has always been about creativity, flexibility, and making the hobby work for you. Whether you're using classic program scenarios, modern rule systems, or cutting edge technology, the goal is the same: to create an engaging, enjoyable experience that keeps you connected to the hobby. So to bring this all together, solo wargaming isn't the lonely, second-rate alternative it's sometimes made out to be. It's a rich, flexible and increasingly sophisticated way of playing that opens up the hobby to more people, more often. It allows you to keep gaming when life gets in the way, to develop your skills, to explore new ideas, and to tell stories on the tabletop in ways that are uniquely your own. And with the growing range of tools and systems available, from Mr Babbage style automation to AI assisted decision making, it's never been easier to create an opponent that challenges you, surprises you, and keeps you coming back for more. But I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this. Do you play solo games? And if so, how do you approach them? Have you found a system that works particularly well for you? Or do you prefer to improvise? Do you have any tips for someone looking to try solo gaming for the first time? And what do you think about the idea of using AI or other technology to automate an opponent? Exciting innovation or not for you at all? Let me know in the comments, because this is one of those topics where the variety of approaches is half the fun of the conversation. That's it for this week. As always, please join the chat in the comments. Until next week, stay safe, keep gaming, and of course, keep rolling high.